Arthur's family truth. My son pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand under the restaurant table. His palm was soaking wet. I could feel it. I didn't look down. I didn't change my expression. Across from me, his fiancée was still talking about Thai orchids and ice sculptures, and her mother was nodding along like she was at church. I slipped the note into my jacket pocket and kept listening. Later in the car, I unfolded it. 4 words, Dad. She's a con artist. I'd spent 34 years in the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. I had sat across from some of the most sophisticated fraudsters in the country, and I had been sitting at that table doing the math in my head, actually thinking about whether I could make the numbers work. My name is Lawrence Pearson. I'm 61. I retired from the Bureau 3 years ago, and that Sunday almost cost my son everything. Ryan called me the night before and said Melissa wanted to share some wedding ideas over lunch. He sounded a little flat when he said it, like he was reading something off a card, but I let it go. They'd gotten engaged 3 weeks earlier, and I figured he was just tired. Planning a wedding is stressful, I know that. Bravo Ristorante was Melissa's pick. It's one of those Italian places in Houston where the menu doesn't have prices and the bread shows up in a little linen basket like it's precious. I've eaten there maybe twice in my life. Ryan and I usually go somewhere simpler, but Melissa had made the reservation, so that was that. Ryan was already there when I arrived. He was sitting across from Melissa and her mother, Patricia, in a corner booth. He smiled when he saw me, but it was the kind of smile that doesn't do anything to the rest of your face. I noticed it. I filed it away. Melissa Alderton was 30 years old and looked like she'd spent serious money making sure of it. Good posture, expensive clothes worn like they were nothing. The kind of woman who's used to people paying attention to her and knows exactly how to use that. Patricia was in her mid-50s, warm smile, soft voice called me Lawrence Honey within the first 2 minutes. She had a practiced southern charm that felt like something she'd rehearsed. We ordered, we made small talk. The server brought bread in its little linen basket. Then Melissa set a leather portfolio on the table and opened it. We've been working with a wedding planner, she said, spreading glossy photos across the white tablecloth. Venues, floral arrangements, a photo of a dress, and we've put together a very clear picture of what we need to make this happen the right way. She slid a single page across to me. A number sat at the top, bold and centered. $1,200,000. I picked up the page. I took a sip of water. I kept my face completely neutral. 34 years of interview rooms will do that to you. The venue is $220,000, she said, pointing to a photo of a private estate in River Oaks, the kind of property that has a name, not just an address. We'd need it for 3 days. Set up the wedding itself and the following day for the farewell brunch. She flipped to the next page. Floral and decor runs $180,000. I've always wanted white orchids flown in from Thailand, and the installation team alone is a significant cost. Another page. Catering and open bar for 250 guests, $125,000. That's roughly $500 per person, which is actually conservative for this level. She paused like she was giving me a moment to absorb this. The dress is $65,000. Custom. My designer is doing it specifically for me. Not off a rack. Patricia leaned in. Melissa has always dreamed of a specific kind of day. You only do this once. We believe in doing it properly. Melissa kept going. Entertainment, live band, DJ, permitted fireworks, $95,000, photography and video, with 2 full teams, $45,000. A fleet of Rolls Royces and limousines for the wedding party and key guests, $42,000. Custom gold leaf invitations for all 250 guests, $38,000. The wedding coordinator's fee, 15% of the total budget, $55,000, ice sculptures and specialty floral installations, $28,000, and then, almost as a footnote, a line at the bottom. Luxury contingency and upgrades, $199,000. I looked at that last line for a moment, nearly $200,000 for things she couldn't specify yet. I set the page down, and you're sharing this with me because I started traditionally, Melissa said, with the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. The groom's family contributes significantly to the wedding. Ryan mentioned that you're comfortable financially. There it was, comfortable. I'd heard that word used the same way in wire fraud depositions. It means we've already looked into you, and we think you'll say yes. I glanced at Ryan. He was staring at his water glass, both hands around it, knuckles a little pale, and that's when I felt the paper land in my hand. Ryan's hand brushed my knee. Something small landed in my palm. I closed my fingers around it without looking down, the way you learn to do after watching enough courtroom handoffs over 3 decades. Patricia was watching me, so I just nodded at something Melissa was saying about the honeymoon, 2 weeks in the Maldives, private overwater villa, $85,000, while I slipped the paper into my jacket pocket. Melissa kept talking, Patricia kept smiling. I kept nodding. Under the table, I unfolded the note with one hand. I didn't look down. I felt the letters with my thumb. Ryan had pressed so hard with the pen that the words were practically carved into the paper. Dad, she's a con artist. Don't agree to anything. Help me. I sat with that for a moment, just a moment. Then I set my water glass down slowly and looked at Ryan, really looked at him this time. The circles under his eyes I'd been chalking up to work stress, the 10 pounds he'd dropped over the past few months, the way he kept checking his phone with an expression I hadn't been able to name until right now. I could name it now. It was dread. He'd been dreading this lunch, maybe dreading it for weeks. How had I missed all of that? I knew how. After my wife Diane passed 9 years ago, I'd thrown myself back into work until I retired, and after that I'd filled the silence with consulting projects and too many hours restoring old furniture in the garage. When Ryan started talking about Melissa last year, something in him seemed lighter, easier. I didn't ask hard questions because I didn't want to be the reason that went away. That was my mistake, and I knew it sitting at that table. Melissa had moved on to the entertainment breakdown, a live band, a DJ, and a permitted fireworks display over the estate grounds. Patricia was adding small affirmations every few sentences. Absolutely. Of course. It's so important to start a marriage the right way. The two of them had a rhythm. It wasn't the rhythm of a mother and daughter planning a wedding together. It was the rhythm of people who had done this before. I looked at the last line on the budget sheet again. Luxury contingency and upgrades of $199,000. Nearly $200,000 with no itemization, no explanation, no vendor attached to it, just a number sitting there. I put the page down. Do you have contracts with any of these vendors? I asked. Melissa blinked. I'm sorry. Signed agreements. Proposals on company letterhead. Anything with a tax ID number on it. The table went quiet. Not the uncomfortable quiet of a misunderstanding. The specific quiet of people who weren't expecting that question. Patricia recovered first. Well, in luxury event planning, vendor relationships are often established through, so you're asking me for one-time $2 million and there are no signed contracts. I wasn't raising my voice. I never do. Nothing in writing, just estimates and ideas. Melissa's expression shifted. The warmth she'd been projecting since I sat down, it didn't fade gradually. It dropped. Like she decided she was done using it. This isn't about paperwork, Lawrence. This is about trust. This is about whether you actually support your son's happiness or whether you're going to make this about money. I'd heard that exact move before. Reframe the reasonable request as a personal attack. Make the other person defend themselves instead of the numbers. I'd watched it work on a lot of people over the years. Good people, smart people. When someone asks me for $1 and $2 million, I said it's always about the paperwork. She tried the wounded angle next. Her voice went soft, her eyes went glassy, and she said something about maybe they should just elope and spare everyone the trouble. Ryan's hand moved toward her instinctively, then stopped in midair. I watched him catch himself. He was fighting his own instincts in real time, and it was costing him. You have 48 hours, I said. I took out my phone and made a show of setting a reminder. Signed proposals from real vendors, company names, addresses, tax IDs. Every dollar on this list accounted for with documentation. If this wedding truly costs $122 million, proving it should take about an afternoon. This is insulting, Patricia said. Her southern charm was gone now. Her voice had a different texture under it. This is due diligence, I said, something I should have done months ago. I stood up. I dropped enough cash on the table to cover the meal and a decent tip for the server, who didn't deserve to get shortchanged because of whatever this was. Then I looked at Ryan. Come on, let's go. Melissa grabbed his arm. Ryan, you don't have to go anywhere. Your father is trying to control Ryan. I kept my voice level. Let's go. He stood up. His legs weren't quite steady, but he stood up. We walked out of Bravo Ristorante into the October heat. Behind us, I could hear Patricia's voice, low, tight, urgent. I didn't catch the words. I didn't need to. Ryan leaned against my car in the parking lot and put his hands on top of his head. He looked like a man who had been holding something very heavy for a very long time and had just been told he could put it down. Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't know how to. You don't have anything to apologize for. I said, get in. Tell me everything. We drove to my house in Highland Park without talking much. Ryan stared out the passenger window at streets he'd grown up on. I didn't push him. Some conversations need a few minutes before they're ready to start. In my study, he told me everything. It took about 2 hours. It had started the way these things always start, with small things that seemed completely reasonable at the time. Melissa had approached him at a charity fundraiser for Houston Children's Hospital about 7 months ago. She was sharp, attentive, asked good questions. She remembered details from one conversation and brought them up in the next. Ryan said it felt like she was genuinely interested in him, not just filling time. By the second date, she was asking which neighborhood he lived in, what his salary range was, what I had done before retiring. He thought she was getting to know him. She was building a profile. The money started small. Month 2, Melissa called him upset, said someone had hit her BMW in a parking lot and the other driver had no insurance. Could Ryan help cover the repair while she sorted out the claim, $8,000? He paid it. The claim never got sorted out and he stopped asking about it. Month 4, Patricia had a procedure scheduled that her insurance wasn't covering. A gap in her policy, Melissa said. Stressful situation. Could Ryan help bridge it temporarily? $6,000, he paid it. Patricia sent him a thank you text with 3 heart emojis. Month 5, a friend of Melissa's was opening a boutique and needed a last-minute investor to secure the lease on a commercial space in Midtown. The opportunity was time-sensitive. Ryan never saw the business, never met the friend, never got a single document. He transferred $14,000 to a routing number Melissa gave him for the business account. $8,000 plus $6,000 plus $14,000, $28,000 in 7 months. Each one reasonable enough on its own. Each one just plausible enough that questioning it would have felt like being the kind of boyfriend who doesn't trust his partner. When did you know something was really wrong? I asked. Ryan looked at his hands. When I told her maybe we could scale the wedding back, I said $200,000 was still a real wedding, a good one. He paused. She threw a wine glass at the kitchen wall. He said she'd apologized immediately after, cried, said she was overwhelmed by the pressure of trying to meet her mother's expectations, and that she was sorry and that she just needed him to believe in their future together. And he'd held her while she cried and told her it was okay. That's when I knew, he said. But I didn't know how to get out. I poured him 2 fingers of bourbon from the bottle I keep in the bottom drawer of my desk. The one I've had since my last week at the bureau. I picked up my phone. Clifford Watts had worked financial fraud cases alongside my team for the last 6 years of my career. He answers his phone at any hour, which is a quality I've always appreciated in a person. Pearson, he said. Thought you were retired. I need background on 2 women, deep background. Melissa Alderton and Patricia Alderton, Houston area. I think they're running a wedding scam. How bad? $28,000 out of my son so far. They asked for $1 today over lunch. A pause. I'll have something for you by Friday. The 48 hours passed. No documentation from Melissa. No vendor contracts. No signed proposals. No tax IDs. Nothing. At hour 47, she sent Ryan a text. Spoke with our planner. She says verbal commitments are completely standard at this level of event. Contracts come after deposits are placed. I thought you trusted me, baby. Ryan forwarded it to me without comment. I saved it. Clifford called Friday morning. Melissa Alderton's legal name was Melissa Christine Vega. She had been engaged 4 times in the past 6 years, all in Texas. Every single engagement had ended 2 to 3 weeks before the scheduled wedding date. First engagements, Scott Mercer, Houston, tech entrepreneur. Lost $85,000 in deposits wired to vendors that turned out to be shell accounts. Second, Larry Brandt, Austin, real estate developer, lost $120,000. Third, Patrick Gould, San Antonio, investment banker, lost $180,000. That one had gotten close to prosecution. Patrick's attorney had pulled vendor contracts and found 8 of the 15 companies on Melissa's budget list didn't exist. But proving criminal intent was complicated enough that the case was dropped. Fourth, Alan Drury, Dallas, retired civil engineer. Lost $72,000 before he figured out what was happening and ended the engagement. He'd never reported it. Too embarrassed, Clifford said. That one wasn't on any official record. Clifford had found it through a source who knew Drury personally. Total across all 4, $457,000, not counting Ryan. Patricia wasn't just a supporting character. The shell accounts trace back to variations of her name and addresses she'd used over the past decade. She had a wire fraud investigation on her record from 8 years ago in Dallas, never resulted in charges, but the file existed. She was the one who set up the financial infrastructure. Melissa was the one who made men fall in love with her. They're a team, Clifford said. Melissa runs the relationship. Patricia runs the money. They've been doing this for at least 6 years that I can document. Then Melissa made the mistake that finished her. 3 days after the deadline I'd given her, she emailed Ryan a 35-page wedding budget, full vendor breakdowns, company names, service descriptions, line item costs. She thought it would prove she was serious. She thought it would pressure Ryan into getting his father back in line. I forwarded it to Clifford the same afternoon. He called back in less than 3 hours. 14 of the 15 vendors on the list did not exist. The one real business, a Houston florist, had never spoken to anyone named Melissa Alderton or Melissa Vega. When Clifford called them posing as a prospective groom checking references, the owner had never heard the name. Melissa had just handed us written evidence of fraud. I called Dennis Holt, my family law attorney, that evening. I need you to get ready, I told him. We have documentation. This is going to move fast. Melissa's next move surprised me. It probably shouldn't have. 2 weeks after the Sunday lunch, she filed a breach of promise lawsuit against Ryan, $800,000 for emotional distress and lost opportunities. Her attorney, a bottom feeder who specialized in exactly this kind of pressure play, had built the case entirely on sympathy. No hard documentation, no financial records, just a narrative about a woman whose future had been stolen by a man who got cold feet and a controlling father who interfered in a loving relationship. It was a good story. If you didn't know what was actually going on, it might have even been persuasive. What Melissa didn't know was that Ryan had started recording 3 weeks before that Sunday lunch. He'd figured something out on his own, that he couldn't confront Melissa directly without things escalating, and that no one would believe him without proof. So he'd suggested to her that they record some of their conversations for relationship transparency. He'd framed it as a trust-building exercise. She'd agreed immediately, without hesitation, because she had no idea what he was actually doing. For 3 weeks, Ryan had been quietly building a file. The audio Dennis played in the courtroom was clear, no background noise, no ambiguity. In one recording, Melissa and Patricia were talking in the kitchen of Ryan's apartment while he was in the next room. They thought he couldn't hear. Patricia was asking how much longer they needed to stay in Houston. Melissa said she thought one more push would do it, that Lawrence was the problem, but that Ryan was still manageable. Patricia said they should think about their exit timeline regardless, because she had a lead on someone in Nashville worth looking at. In another clip, Melissa was on the phone with someone neither of us ever identified. She was describing Ryan's financial situation in specific numbers, his salary, his savings estimate, what she believed his inheritance from me would eventually be worth. She called him the current project. She said he was softer than the last one, but that the father was a problem she hadn't anticipated. Judge Sandra Howell listened to both recordings without changing her expression once. She had the kind of face that gives nothing away until it decides to. When the second clip ended, she let the silence sit for a moment. The plaintiff's suit is dismissed with prejudice, she said. I'm referring this matter to the Harris County District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. Court is in recess. Melissa's face crumpled. Not the practice crumble she deployed at the restaurant. This was something different. This was real. Patricia grabbed her arm and said something in a low voice that I didn't catch, and Melissa shook her off. I had already called Russell Grant at the Attorney General's Financial Crimes Division the night before. He had been in my unit for 6 years before moving to the AG's office. He knew how to move quickly when the evidence was clean, and the evidence we had was clean. The warrants were ready before Melissa's attorney had even filed his post-hearing paperwork. Melissa Alderton, Melissa Christine Vega received 4 years. The documentation was solid, the recordings were damning, and she had no criminal history to complicate sentencing in either direction. Patricia got 5. The prior wire fraud investigation on her record, even without a conviction, gave the prosecutor exactly what he needed to argue pattern of conduct. It landed. Joint restitution $485,000 to be paid to all 5 victims: Scott Mercer, Larry Brandt, Patrick Gould, Alan Drury, and Ryan. The court's math was straightforward. The bureau's was cleaner. The night after sentencing, I sat in my study for a while. Just sat. The house was quiet in the way it gets after 9 p.m. On a weeknight, no traffic outside, no noise from the neighbors, just the hum of the refrigerator down the hall. There's a photograph of Diane on the bookshelf across from my desk. It's from a trip we took up to Colorado when Ryan was maybe 12. She's standing at the edge of a trail with her jacket tied around her waist, laughing at something just out of frame. I don't remember what was funny that day. I've tried. I just remember that she laughed like that a lot. I looked at the photo for a while and thought about the fact that I had almost written a $1 $2 million check at a Sunday lunch because I didn't want to ask hard questions. Because I was so relieved Ryan had found someone that I stopped paying attention to what I was actually looking at. 34 years catching financial criminals, and my blind spot turned out to be my own son. I didn't say any of that out loud. I just sat with it. Then I turned off the desk lamp and went to bed. 6 months later, Ryan called me on a Tuesday evening. He sounded the way he used to sound before all of this, easy, like a man who's been sleeping well. He told me about a woman named Nancy, third-grade teacher. They'd met at a friend's birthday dinner. On their second date, he'd told her the full story about Melissa, everything, figuring she deserved to know what she was getting into. She'd listened to the whole thing, and when he finished, she said, "For $120 million, we could buy a house and take the best vacation of our lives." He said he laughed harder than he had in over a year. I told him I was glad. And I meant it. Here's the thing I've been thinking about since all of this. I've spent 34 years learning to spot the mechanics of financial fraud. The asset assessment questions disguised as small talk, the isolation from friends and family, the escalating requests that each stay just below the threshold where a reasonable person would push back. I knew all of it. I've testified about all of it in federal court, and I was sitting at that table doing the math, working out whether I could make the numbers work. Getting ready to say yes, Ryan saved himself. He grabbed a pen, found a scrap of paper, pressed so hard the letters carved through, and put it in my hand without looking at me. That took more courage than most people would give him credit for. He was sitting next to a woman he'd loved, in front of a mother who'd spent months making him feel like family. And he found a way to ask for help. That's the part I think about most. Not the recordings, not the courtroom, not the 4 years and the 5 years, and the $485,000 in restitution. Just a folded piece of paper, and a son who didn't give up. The best thing I did that Sunday wasn't the deadline I set or the contacts I called or any of the 34 years of experience I brought to bear on Melissa Alderton and her mother. The best thing I did was stand up and walk out of that restaurant with my son. Everything else just followed from there. When a con artist targets your family, they're counting on one thing above everything else, that love will make you stop asking questions. The moment you start asking them again, the whole thing falls apart. 34 years taught me that the most dangerous frauds aren't built on complicated lies. They're built on the simple things you want so badly to be true that you never think to verify them. If this story hit close to home, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you've been through something like this yourself, drop it in the comments. You'd be surprised how many people are sitting on the same story, just waiting for someone else to go first. Hit subscribe if you want more. I'll be here.